Hello, viewers. Good afternoon. You're watching Civic Space TV, and we are on Women's Show today. With me here today, we have a human rights lawyer, a feminist, program manager of ActionAid Uganda, who has also done tremendous work in the women's movement. She's the one and only Council Mercy Munduru. You're welcome to Women's Show today.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you. And also we have an activist that you've seen several times in Makerere University. She has led and spearheaded several campaigns like The Fees Must Fall. She was a former Minister of Gender in Makerere University, and she has also done a lot of work in regards to women activism and human rights. You're welcome, Kirabo Marion.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So in today's session, we'll have an engagement in regards to the current issues that are happening in our country that also concern the women, but also the people of Uganda. And we'll start with Council Mercy Munduru, Grace. So, Council Mercy, last week we heard about the arrest of Afiego staff, including the executive director, Dixon Kamja, but also a few weeks ago, there were 54 organizations that were suspended. So what's your take in regards to the arrest of those staff who are NGO workers or employees, and also the women that were affected? What's your take in regards to that?
Thank you very much. First of all, what we see happening is not new. It is just a manifestation of what we've seen for a long time, what we've spoken about on this show for a long time, especially regarding, the shrinking civic space. I actually want to believe with the events that just unfolded last week, the space is no longer shrinking, it's literally shutting down. And that goes to really show the kind of democratic state we're in as a country, our governance focus, but also the future of civic engagement in this country. This situation did not start today. We have had similar situations in 2016. This is not an isolated case, but perhaps somebody would argue that in 2016 and the cases before that, the target was mostly governance-related organizations, but also the timing was around elections. So somebody would think that that had everything to do with the election, period. But with what has manifested even after elections and continuously, you can already start to tell that there is a bigger question of the civic space, of what the government intends to do with the civic space. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, different reasons have been given for the closure of organizations, especially civil society organizations. We had the first 7 that were shut because of, several levels of irregularity that was described, including claims that some of these organizations were soliciting money from unsuspecting members of society, and several other reasons that were given by the NGO Bureau. But also we saw the 54 organizations, which was the last couple of months ago, where organizations were shut, but this time the reason was compliance. And so at the back of our minds, we must remember that all of these government institutions will give you whatever reason they can to justify their actions. And such actions include closures. I say this because some of the organizations that were listed were able to bring proof of compliance, especially regarding registration, filing returns, and operating legally in Uganda. But nevertheless, their licenses were withdrawn, and it was not one organization, 54 organizations. So in my opinion, when you see such a downward trend regarding the operation of civil society organizations, we have to worry about our governance landscape. And this is no longer about governance institutions, because if you see the list of organizations that were published, they did not necessarily only focus on governance. Most of them are doing different work around human rights, around environmental rights. Some of them are faith-based organizations. Others are, working on women's rights and all of that. So that goes to show that the space is shrinking for civil society broadly. It is not really targeted at a particular organization based on perhaps the governance work that they do. But we must not also forget that the heightened risk is for organizations working around governance-related issues, because they're looked at as, organizations that are moving beyond what they are expected to do, because the state constantly re-emphasizes that civil society should stick to doing what they describe as civil society work. So meaning the moment you address any issues related to governance, any issues around accountability, then you are looked at as, opposing the status quo, and that could easily put an organization at risk. So what happened with Afiego was unfortunate. One, because I believe the arrest is illegal. Even if they are operating without a license, if that is the justification for the arrest, then we must remember that the law is very clear pertaining what happens to organizations that operate without their license. And in this case, the fine is 2 million shillings. That is what that's civil in nature. I do not know the criminality in their operations. And as far as I know, because I was personally at the police to go and visit the arrested staff, you cannot easily place the charges that have been pressed against this staff and the organization. You can't place them in our current criminal laws. But also what is unfortunate is, the number of staff that have been arrested. Most of these are everyday employees of the organization, and some of them are women in difficult situations. I know that one of the staff is a lactating mother. We know that some of them are in ill health, but also the way our justice system works and how they treat accused persons, whether you're a woman or a man, is very wanting. We're supposed to see gender dimensions even in the way that we respond, in the way accused persons are arrested, in the way they're incarcerated, the considerations that are put for the unique and maternal needs of women in incarceration. I don't see that being applied in the way our justice system works, and even in this current arrest that we're talking about. So it's quite unfortunate. And for me, it's something that should be of concern to every Ugandan, because today it's NGOs, but tomorrow it could be private sector, it could be any other section of society. We've seen this go down to musicians and all other groups of persons. So it's about time we must speak for situations like this. We must be able to question the system, even when we know that it can be very risky to do so. And the environment being very harsh, the environment being very violent in nature, several people tend to keep away because they fear that the next could be them. But the next is actually going to be them anyway, whether they think about it or not. So I think it's very important for us to speak out, and I must commend civil society leaders for coming out in solidarity to speak against what happened, and even to extend this towards visiting their incarcerated colleagues and trying to seek justice on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mercy, for that informative explanation. Now back to you, the feminist and human rights law student, Marion. Most of the organizations that have been suspended have been even working with universities. Also the shrinking civic space. Most institutions of higher learning, even primary schools, secondary schools are closed. What's your take in regards to that? Connecting it to the COVID pandemic, because that's maybe one of the things that they're always raising, that they are closed because of that. So what's your take in regards to that?
Well, it's unfortunate that even when other countries are opening up, Uganda still remains, at this rate, is going to be the only country.
Mhm.
There are very few countries that are still locked up, that continues to put the education sector under this kind of lockdown. That since the vaccines have come in, what other countries have decided to do is that let us just provide the vaccines, open up, and let people access vaccines wherever we can, make sure that people get the vaccines that they need to protect themselves. But to me, I feel like it's not a coincidence. I feel like there might be a link, if we look at it, between what I will call it a sort of also lockdown in the civic space, and also universities and schools, because I think as given what happened in the 2021 elections, I think the government is now threatened by young people. It is also threatened by the support that they feel like civic society gives to the young people. So they are making sure that they use the pandemic as a cover to kind of control these spaces, which they would not have control over if they were free to operate normally. That perhaps in their thinking, what happened, this whole people power revolution came about because they allowed maybe civil society and young people to interact. That they allowed the feminist groups to empower the young women to go and stand for positions and vote. That they encouraged the civil society to organize and empower young people. So now that the pandemic has come and has created for them a kind of excuse, they see an opportunity to close these places. I'll give you an example, Makerere. Right now in Makerere, there are no students. The only students on campus are medical students.
Mm-hmm.
That because of the pandemic, even when we had a conference, a women's conference, and we were just inviting, inspirational, powerful women to come and like mentor students, and despite getting a letter from the Ministry of Health and clearing us at that time to have this conference, because a one Stella Nyanzi was on the panel, or a one Rebecca Kadaga was on the panel, or a one Flavia Kalile was on the panel, suddenly it became like we were conspiring against the state. And they brought police everywhere. And I remember, one of the police officers pointing his gun at us and chasing us away literally and saying, "You're looking for trouble if you're the ones who invited Stella Nyanzi." So there's I see a nexus between the two, that it's a deliberate attempt to suffocate organizing and movement building in this country. That they gave you space in the past, and they were almost gotten out of power because of it. So this time we're going to make sure that there is no room for you to organize. There is no room for you to spread your message across. And we're going to make sure we put a tight lid on every place that you have, that you can bring people together, that you can bring people together, that people can start to question, that people can start to have these conversations. We're going to make sure these conversations don't exist at all. So I think, to me, that is what is happening. That when I look at the reopening of schools, it is political. It has now become political. Because one of the arguments we were giving is that, why don't you open up schools and then bring the vaccination points within, for example, the university, instead of making people walk all this way because people are very far away, There's free vaccination at the university hospital, but someone is living in Entebbe, a student is living in Entebbe. It would be better for them to be attending class, and outside there's a vaccination point. You would easily get all the 45,000 students vaccinated because they're all in one place, and the vaccination point is very close to them. So if your aim was to get everyone vaccinated, why don't you bring the vaccination to schools? I think we used to have programs when we were young where immunization would take place at school. Remember that? And it was so effective. Yeah. So I'm wondering why the same government that did that can't do that now. You get? Yeah, so to me, that's my take. I think it has become political, unfortunately, in my thinking. That is it.
Thank you so much, Marion. And I think it is clear, it's stipulated, like she said, the civic space question, we need to engage more, but also what you're talking about in regards to the vaccinations which have been taken to schools before. I remember even 2 years ago, the hepatitis B, when they started, it was taken to school.
Yeah,
so,
it was taken
okay.
to school.
So back to Mercy. Mercy, in October, we celebrate our independence. There are many conversations that come up. However, the conversations that have been going on in the country, most of them are towards celebrating the men that contributed to the independence, all the conversations and manners that have been going around. So I want to know, as a feminist, what do you think is the role, or the role women have played in regards to independence specifically more in regards to the economy. Since independence, what is that role that women have played? Thank you.
I feel women are a very instrumental part of the governance infrastructure. One, because we all know that if you look at our population index, we have more women in Uganda than men. And having that number, majority of those women are in the informal sector. We also know that. And as such, from time immemorial, because of the way our society is structured, first of all, because of the social norms that have, socialized women as caregivers for the most part, you realize that a lot of the contribution of women are informal in nature, and that has been the case for so many years. I see more women, of course, since independent, now moving into the formal space, but also because of the existing legal and policy framework, we see more women in decision-making spaces, in more formal settings, but that was not the case many years ago. But nevertheless, even if that was not the case, we cannot deny or run away from the fact that women have made a very tremendous contribution. First of all, we know that a country like ours, the bedrock is agriculture, and 76% of the people in that sector are women, and they're the ones that are contributing towards shaping the economy of this country. And so every time I see the president or the parliament or different sections of society talking about our economy and how much it is growing and how meaningful it is becoming over the years, we have women to thank, because they really do make a meaningful contribution directly as contributors in that sector, but also indirectly because they do care work. That means they're holding a fort for the men while they go and pursue their other agendas. So I have them to thank because, again, much as women contribute to this trajectory, we know that many of these women do not have control and ownership of even the resource that they're using to contribute to this economy. So whereas the agriculturalists, they're farming and doing all of this, they do not own that land, and there are also several of them that do not control even the proceeds from what they do with the land, which is a very worrisome situation. But also it goes to really tell how much our societal norms, limit women's participation, but also impede women's ability to grow economically and to meaningfully contribute towards the development of the country and their own development as well. I must also say there are several women, by the way, in the mainstream governance infrastructure that contributed to Uganda's economic growth through their participation in policy-making processes. We know that our very first constitution and its composition had women involved, leading conversations, making decisions in that space to include, different facets of the law within the existing legal framework. So I must commend those women as well. There were women who fought at the forefront. There were women who were collaborators at the time that the country was gaining its independence. At the time when, there had to be conversations happening between the colonialists and also native Ugandans, there were very many women that are mentioned in history as being catalysts for our independence. And they normally do not get the recognition they deserve, but we do not take away the fact that they did contribute to that roadmap that has brought us to where we are. We also have quite a lot of women in the cultural institutions and in the religious sector as well. As you know, we're a faith-based country. We know that Uganda being a faith-based country means that the faith-based institutions play a very significant role in terms of how our country is run, in terms of where our country goes, in terms of how citizens perceive and embrace issues of governance. And we know that there are also several women in those sectors, in the different religious sects or in the cultural institutions, that are influencing positively for this country's economic trajectory. So I must say that women have contributed very significantly, but we must also remember that despite that contribution, we're still struggling when it comes to women's economic empowerment. And as the context is even now with COVID-19, with the disruptions that happened, it is women that are significantly affected. And it's no wonder, if you look at the poverty statistics after this particular pandemic, you realize that women are disproportionately affected because several of them have had to drop off their economic activities, given that there's an increased care burden at home. So they're taking care of their families, they're taking care of the sick. They do not invest as much time in things that would otherwise benefit them or that would generate a monetary benefit, since they are clamped up, taking care of children at home and other things. So that we must not take away, and that is something that we must consider. But even in our own recovery, as government is slowly trying to get the economy to recover from this heat, has gender been mainstreamed in their recovery efforts? All the relief, economic relief that is being given to the private sector, how are women mainstreamed? All the relief that they're giving to the, the artists and all of these other sectors of our economy, is gender being mainstreamed? Are we recognizing and appreciating the fact that they've been disappropriately affected? And do we even reason in a forward-thinking manner to accept the fact that if majority of your population are women, and women have been significantly affected, that means that your poverty index is going to go up automatically? So that is why I believe that whereas we've made some strides, we must pay attention to the context now, but also how it's impacting women's economic empowerment. And
wow. Thank you so much, Mercy, for that. And maybe back to you in regards to what you've said. I also believe that you're right. They have played a tremendous role, and also, like you said, they have been catalysts in regards to the independence. You've talked about women's economic empowerment. I wanted maybe to find out from you, before I go to Marion, what has been COVID-19 impact in regards to women's economic empowerment? Because you've raised it a bit, so we want you to give us a more bigger insight in regards to that.
Thank you very much. Of course, in terms of, first of all, the guidelines that were given to, promote safe living in the wake of COVID-19, we know that most of these restrictions included, limiting social gatherings. Also, in terms of, the markets or the crowded places where people commune to do their businesses and all of that, because of the social distance elements, there were restrictions that were targeted really to limit, that kind of engagement. And in this process, several women, they lost their source of livelihood. Many of our women are key players in the informal sector, and the informal sector was hit very hard when it came to the restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that means that several women were affected significantly and disappropriately. But we also know during the enforcement of these restrictions, there were several women that suffered sexual abuse and harassment, especially women that had to sleep in the markets. But also there were women who at the same time left children unattended to while they stayed in the markets to sell, and that significantly affected girl children who now remained unattended. But also the gender gap, it widened the gender pay gap, because several women and girls are employed in the tourism industry. Most of them are working as hotel attendants and all of this. If you go to hotels, majority of the employees are women and girls. If you go to the leisure industry, majority of them are women and girls. The bars that have been closed, most of the people that work there are women and girls. Most of the spaces as cleaners, as office attendants, this is where most women and girls have been employed, and as a result, as companies and other formal sectors have been downgrading or reducing on their staff given the impact of COVID-19, most of these girls and women have lost their sense of livelihood. So that means there's now a bigger or a wider gender gap in terms of pay. Also the fact that very many girls got pregnant during this period, and women as well. So coming back to work, being able to catch up with their male counterparts is quite a challenge for them. But also political participation. Unfortunately, we had an election during that time that we were also battling with COVID-19. And so several women had to make the conscious choice: do I run for elective politics? If I do, who will take care of my family? The children are home, they're not going to school. So I cannot be away for campaigns while my children starve. So several of them that could have participated in elective politics could not because of the excessive care burden. So that partly is what really significantly impacted women from an economic, perspective, but also broadly, really decision making. If you look at the composition of the response teams at regional level, at national level, and you look at the gender dimension, how many women are represented in that space, and able to analyze the issues that need women's response, it was very difficult. And lastly, really, also the response mechanisms were compromised. I remember in the first lockdown where all the toll-free lines were captured and used for reporting COVID-19 cases. And the head of state came out openly to say that gender-based violence is not an urgent issue. So therefore, we should focus all of our attention towards responding. And in that process, of course, women could not access justice, could not access care, could not access services because the entire country was shut. But in many countries, there were alternatives that were put in place where if a woman is suffering domestic violence, there were particular places designated as escape spaces for them to be able to, escape from their abusers. And unfortunately, we lost so many women to death by domestic violence, given the report that police gave.
Thank you so much, Mercy. Maybe before you go to another question, I want to find out from Marion. As a young woman and as a feminist, how do you think COVID-19 has impacted young women in regards to women's economic empowerment? Because just like Mercy said, women have been in the informal, but now some of them have even joined the formal sector. And we've seen young women doing tremendous work in regards to women's economic empowerment. However, with outbreak and also of COVID-19, how has it affected you or impacted the lives of young women in regards to that?
I think to me, COVID-19 has been a very big blow, especially to women. And even before we even go to those who are earning economically, it has been a big blow right from the girls themselves. And it's, to me, I feel like we have lost a generation of young women who could have aspired for more, who could have been great. Because let's first go with even the pregnancy levels, teenage pregnancy levels. We know what happens, the consequences of teenage pregnancy. Now, to have it at that scale, 9,000. What then becomes the future? Because, okay, first of all, the psychological torment of that you are a young child, you can barely take care of yourself, and then now you have a baby. That most of these girls are people who are from not well-to-do families already. Their families are struggling financially. That perhaps they were taking this girl to school because they hoped that she could break the cycle of poverty. Now she's pregnant. So the future or the hope of the whole family is gone, but also her. What becomes of her now that she's a young mother? What are the economic opportunities available to her? Her school has stopped, because for most, we know the reality that when a girl gets pregnant, it's the end of school in this country for most families. It's where you're very lucky because you have two burdens now, and the family can't take care of you and your baby. They can't send you to school and also take care. Who's going to take care of the baby that you now have? Already they were struggling to get you to school. Now they have another mouth to feed. So your education stops there. In most cases, the fathers of these babies run away. And so she becomes a single mom at a young age. So she has to take care of her baby. She's struggling on her own. And that is where you see she's pushed to the informal sector. And we know the kind of livelihood that is there for them, that no matter how hard she works, she's paid peanuts or not paid at all, So if this is the reality for these 9,000 girls, what does that mean for the poverty index, like she said? That already they are struggling families, and now they are producing more struggling families. So what does it mean for this generation of girls and also the future generation of their kids? Probably they are going to be worse off from it than even the families they came from, because they got offsprings at a very young age, and therefore it's going to be a whole life of strife. and they might not even be able to take their kids to school, even to reach the level that they reached for them before they got pregnant. So for me, I start from there. That itself is already a big problem. But then also, of course, we go to the areas that shut down, you know. We know that the people in the marketplaces that were locked down are mostly women. They're the ones who sell this produce. That when you go into a market, the person who's going to sell to you these tomatoes and this food produce is going to be a woman. That yes, the most of the traders that we see, the hookers that we see on the streets are women, a big majority of them trying to find a livelihood. So with the lockdown, how has that affected their capacity to earn, you know? But also with their children at home, that's another mouth to feed. I think that people take it for granted that when people send their kids at school, there's a way that it also goes softer in their pockets. That unlike in lockdown, where you know that there are 5 people to feed, let me say me, my husband, and 3 kids. The 3 kids are not there. Probably you're going to send them to school and pay school fees at the end of the term. So the cost you see for 3 months, you're not taking care of them. You're not feeding them. You're not providing, let me say, soap. You're not providing, let me say, food. Electricity bill has gone down. Water. It's the school that has that financial burden, that carries that financial burden for you. But also for the people who work the whole day, the maid cost gets out. The household cost gets, the one for the household gets out. So it lessens the burden, the daily expenditure. But now with the daily expenditure and every workplace that you had to go to is closed down, you can just imagine that kind of situation. You're not earning, but your bills are going up because everyone is at home now and you have to take care of them. So to me, I will agree with her and say that it's even worse than we think. That to me, I feel so saddened when the Minister of Education goes up and say that parents are being irresponsible. But look at this parent. Their bills certainly have gone up. There's no way they can put their kid, there's nowhere to send their kid to have that 24-hour surveillance that the school gives. But at the same time, they have nothing to eat. So it's either they choose to monitor their kid 24/7, or they watch them starve and don't go to work. That's the choice they have to make. Like, they have no choice. That you're either going to watch your kids starve or you go to work.
Yeah.
So yes, you're leaving them home alone. You don't have money to get maybe a house help, but we've also seen house helps abuse children. So what is a person to do in that kind of situation? So I feel like there's a lot of insensitivity, and people never think about the realities that most women face, most girls face, that everything affects us, but it affects us double because we have the maternal side to handle. You know, we are the caregivers in this case. That for us, it's just not about losing your job, but lockdown means that the kids are back at home and the expenses have gone up. That lockdown means that I will have to sleep at the market and there are people who are waiting to prey on me. That there's so many dimensions. Lockdown means that I'm staying at home, but when I'm staying at home, I'm at the risk of being sexually abused because there's no one to protect me at home. That it means all these different dimensions for women. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Maybe still on that, like you said, most of the girls that get pregnant, most of them don't even go back to school. Back to Mercy, the Uganda Demographic Survey 2016 provided that 25% of girls get pregnant below the age of 18. And also in the current reports, the police reports, and also under Minister of Gender, there have been several reports that the number of teenage girls that are getting pregnant, the numbers are increasing. since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, the numbers have even doubled. So from 25%, we are looking at over 50 to 70%, because now those are the numbers of the girls that report. As a program manager at ActionAid, first I would like to commend ActionAid as an organization, because you've been able to set up a shelter that supports gender-based violence survivors. And we believe that there are also children or girls in those shelters. So what's your take in regards to the increasing numbers of girls that are being abused, girls that are staying with their abusers at home? Because we know people that abuse girls are non strangers. They're people in position of power and influence. There's a teenage mom home or teenage shelter, which is the Remnant Generation. When we had research that was taken there, over 80% of the girls that were raped or defiled were defiled by their uncles, their fathers, their brothers. So that's more of incest cases in Uganda than never before. But then we won't blame COVID-19. However, it's one of the things that brought it up. So as someone that works in an organization that even has a shelter that caters for these people, what's your take in regards to these increasing numbers of teenage pregnancies in Uganda?
Thank you very much. I speak about that with a lot of pain in my heart, because that is the future of this country. The girls, the young girls that should be studying, young girls that should be growing up to become a better version of themselves and take up these very spaces we're in. First, it really goes to pandemic planning. I think we haven't learned enough to understand what a pandemic is and what would be a sustained approach to pandemics, because this is not the first and this is not the last pandemic we're going to have. So that means in the face of a pandemic, we're supposed to have strategies that address key, urgent and emerging issues. One of them is, of course, the issue of gender-based violence, which is huge. Why? Because it's not a new phenomenon. COVID didn't bring it. It has been here. We've been talking about it, and many times when you talk about it, they say, oh, those women are just making noise, or these women and this and that. What COVID has done is to put to light what we have been speaking about for a long time, that we have a problem in our hands, that there's a bigger problem than the security questions that we speak about every day, that there's a bigger problem, that the real insecurity is the insecurities that we face and endure in our homes. Is the real insecurity that targets young people at different levels. But we as a state, as a community, have yet not acknowledged properly that this is a problem, and that if we don't address it, it will have a bearing on the entire governance infrastructure. It will have an impact on our poverty in terms of our uptake of education, sexual and reproductive rights, human rights, and all dimensions that you can mention, our economy and all of that. But because we have not recognized that, we are just considering these numbers as any statistic. One, the strategy for education. We know that the education system has since shut down, but we do not also have alternatives for learning. And the few alternatives that we have, for example, maybe I should say, we have inadequate alternatives for learning, because there are some, for example, digital learning that has been introduced. But we must also acknowledge the huge digital divide. The number of young people in the rural areas is bigger than those in urban areas. So there is a reality of, the huge digital divide, but also the real concerns of care work for young girls, especially, who, even if they have access to the digital devices that would enable them learn during this period, due to the care work, cannot even make time to study like their male counterparts. That's already a problem. And so for the state to sluggishly approach the question of education, for me, speaks to our misplaced prioritization. Because young people should have access to education, regardless of a pandemic. We must have workable alternatives that promote learning, but also we must invest more in terms of education. Because one thing I see, for example, is that, you see, the whole issue of incest the heightened cases of gender-based violence and all of these gender-based violence cases that we report have everything to do with the mindset of our people. But how much are we doing to change that mindset? I will not say it's COVID. I will not say it's alcohol. I will not. Those are contributing factors. But the real issue is the mindset of our people. Because for somebody to choose to abuse a girl in their care starts with their mind. But how much are we doing to promote learning around, rights of women, rights of children, gender-based violence, increasing, available, response mechanisms? We're not even investing as much in that. If you look at our budget for this financial year, how much was allocated to gender? The Ministry of Gender still gets the least amount of money compared to other ministries.
Mm-hmm.
Other ministries, other sectors like security get a lot of money because the government considers the real security threat to be other issues other than gender-based violence. But majority of your women and young people are affected by that. So if you do not budget for that sector, where are your priorities? We should be having more education programs, especially around gender-based violence, attitude change, response mechanisms. We have 13 shelters in this country. ActionAid runs 11 of those. But the money for running those shelters comes from development partners. That is where the real investment should be. And those are just 13. How many districts do we have in Uganda? We have over 100 districts. So where do the girls, these 9,000 plus girls that are pregnant, where do they go for care? They're forced into marriage. Because now forced marriages are a coping mechanism for many parents who can no longer afford to take care of these girls. So we must invest in education, especially sensitization and awareness about gender-based violence, about sexual and gender-based violence, reproductive rights, available services. We must heighten our response. Community policing should focus more on these dangers. If you choose to keep schools closed, then invest more in helping societies to appreciate the dangers of this vice, so that by the time you open up, you have children to go to school. Because I'm afraid you will open space for children to learn and there will be no girls to learn. What are we going to do as a country? And for me, that is an urgent and very important intervention that the government must consider.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mercy, for explaining that very well. And also, I liked how you stipulated and explained more in regards to the priorities of the government, also the issue of budget allocation, where it is always allocated in areas that are not the main focus of our country or that are not affected, and also the need to invest more in the education sector. So now you, as a woman leader and also a feminist and a program manager of ActionAid, what are some of the key priorities that you think women leaders should focus on during this period?
One is we need to ensure that the policy spaces are having this conversation we're having. It's very important for us to put at the forefront of our conversations, especially in the policy spaces, the issue of women's economic empowerment. It is very key because it is a key indicator for development. So that means we must reintroduce the bills that went halfway, like the market bill, which was supposed to regulate the informal sector, but also offer some level of social security for women in the informal sector. For me, that is a very critical area of intervention, that we must unpack women's economic empowerment, look at women's labor rights, look at women in the informal sector on issues of taxation, on regulation, how gender sensitive are they and how considerate are they to the unique needs of women and their vulnerabilities as well. I think that is very key for us. Second of all is to reintroduce the bills around sexual violence and violence against women. I know that we recently lost a battle for sexual offences bill, but I believe it should be reintroduced because whereas it has it may have areas that need to be interrogated further, I still believe you cannot throw the baby with the bathwater. Like, we must retain something, because for me, consolidating laws and making them more stringent and giving an opportunity for sections of the penal code to be revisited, but more comprehensively, is very important for our response mechanisms around issues of GBV. So I believe our policymakers should focus a lot on having the right policy and regulatory framework that promotes women's rights. But also, most importantly, that we must have women in leadership empowered to use those decision-making spaces to highlight the needs and the challenges that women are experiencing. I believe women's leadership is a very key issue for us, and we must continuously promote that in every space that we're in, especially if you're a woman in leadership. You must have at the core of your mind how you are empowering other women in leadership. Personally, even as a women leader in a civil society organization, I am very passionate about, ensuring that the institution is abiding by, the gender policy, and ensuring that we are promoting women's leadership even in the spaces in which we are. And I believe that should not be just limited to political leadership, but also each one of us that finds ourselves in a position of leadership, because the more women we have in leadership positions, the better decisions for us as a country, for us as communities, as families. It's very core for us. Of course, lastly, on the issue of education, I think our leaders should focus more on pressuring government towards developing sustainable strategies for education, knowing very well that COVID could resurface in a third wave, or another pandemic could resurface. So what are we going to do? Are we going to still use the same strategy, shut down schools, don't give alternatives, wait until the government decides that children can go back to school? No, we must push government towards, having robust strategies for education in the wake of a pandemic. We must be able to push them to give us alternatives to the solutions that they are giving us for managing COVID-19. It's very important for us to manage it, yes, but also it's more important for us to interrogate how we manage it without crippling the country further.
Wow, thank you so much. I think that was so elaborate. There's even nothing more to add on it. So now back to Marion. Marion, we've seen you on several occasions, especially this last month. You've been having a lot of discussions in regards to insecurity in Uganda, the massacre killings, and also the country we're currently experiencing a lot of insecurities, terrorist threats. So as a young leader and also a women rights activist, what role do you think women play in regards to promoting peace, but also what's your take in regards to what's happening, the terrorist threats, and all those things that are happening in regards to the insecurity in the country? Thank you.
Well, it is very unfortunate that that security in this country seems to be a priority according to who you are. That over the, at least since seeing how the security and security operatives have reacted to certain situations and to certain people throughout at the beginning of this year, from the 2021 elections to now, that there has been a pattern that at least the general public, the sentiments are that there has been a kind of discrimination in the way that the security, whether it be police or the army, reacts to certain threats. That when it's massacre killings, they will take over a week without saying anything or responding and ignoring it. That it is until the public comes and puts pressure that they will try and go there and see what is happening. But even when they go there, the arrests that they make, they might make inadequate arrests, let me say. The people they go after, like it has become a trend, you will see that it's usually the Muslim community that is first at, so the arrests always happening in the Muslim community, which is very, very unfair. Later on, I think we have seen different news reports coming out that there were even people who were paid off, to testify falsely, so that the police can get the public off their back. But then when it comes to, let me say, political actors, that when it comes to, let me say, that basically I said we're going to walk to work, or that Chagulanyi has said that, you see, we're going to have a presser here and here, that you are going to see the police react so fast, and give all sorts of explanations why they had to to take these people in, to stop whatever they did, you know, they were causing violence. But when the UK government, when the United Kingdom's government reports and says that be on alert, Uganda, there might be a terrorist attack anytime. The police comes out and says, there's nothing to worry about, there's nothing to see here, we are all good and okay. They do not bother to assess the threat. They do not bother to caution the public and say, you see, the matter is under control, or give us reasons why. That up to now there have been killings of prominent people in this country, and we still don't know who is behind it. That even the arrests that they made, like I said before, even the arrests that they make seem to be false arrests. That up to now we do not know who killed the likes of the Kawesis of these very prominent leaders. Up to now we do not know if we as a country are safe. We do not know who killed the women in Entebbe. We do not know who killed the people in Masaka. Before even this incident, there were Masaka killings. That there are so many cases that go unanswered in this country, and yet when it comes to civil society, or connecting civil society to funding the opposition and things like that, that we always have an explanation. We even have a money trail, whether it's made up or whether it's real. So the situation in this country is quite worrying. It's quite unfair that I feel like, and it becomes so how can I say, it's a double-edged sword for most of us Ugandans in this country, that even when we try as civilians to push for answers, there is no one to push. You get me? That even when you try to go and have your protests in Masaka, like you saw what people are saying, that the minister in charge will go and abuse you on TV, you know, and that is where it will end. And then accuse you, people are always complaining, but you're not giving us answers. Now, when we look at the role of women in peace and security, of course, women play a very vital role in peace and security, given that, first of all, I mean, they are half of this population. And when it comes to insecurity, they are the ones that are mostly affected, and they're the most vulnerable. So keeping the peace matters more to a woman than even a man would, because she knows that if war or insecurity breaks out, it's going to be me who's going to be raped or brutalized or beaten up. It's going to be my children who are in trouble, that I would not have where to keep them or how to keep them safe. So most of the time, women are so, how can I say, so deliberate at keeping the peace. And some have said we're so good at dialogue and talking out issues and avoiding conflict. However, in this situation in Uganda, that platform, I feel like that platform is not given. There is little avenue for us to actually be part of that peace and security keeping process. Yes, we have a lot we have a good number of women in the police. It's not so huge, but they are there. But you see that they are captives of a system, of an oppressive system, that most of the time they don't have their own agency, that they're actually working for the system of oppression, and they're not active in that kind of process of keeping the peace. So we find ourselves that no matter how much a positive role we can play, but because of the way the system is constructed, the women who get in there serve the system of oppression and the system, the source of insecurity, more than they are supposed to be there to actually contribute to keeping the peace in the society. So it's a very unfortunate situation. Perhaps to me, the solution would be is that I think as leaders and in the civic space or as activists, I think, yes, the policies are needed, the laws are needed, but we have seen so many good laws being enacted, and we have not seen them implemented. That we have deliberated, had these debates, put in place these policies, these very nice policies, but at the end of the day, because the government is unwilling to implement them, and yet it is the executive that is supposed to implement them, that they stay on the shelves and they are not implemented, or they don't do much to help the person that they're supposed to help. To me, going forward, I think it is high time that we take the struggle, perhaps from the parliament, from the courts of law, to the common man or woman. That we need to find a way that when we're talking about the sexual offences bill, it is not only civil society talking about it, it is not only maybe a one member of parliament talking about it, that it is the market woman who is getting abused that is demanding that it is passed. That how can we get the woman, the hawker who has been sexually abused, that is demanding for it, that she is the one who is organizing her fellow women, and even male allies to come and storm parliament and demand that it is passed. We need to stop fighting. Okay. It's not that we need to stop fighting, but we need to just come in as support systems for these people, that it is them to fight their battles. I think that is the thing that is lacking the most, that government can easily brush you away as civil society, because they feel like, you're fighting for people who seem to be very comfortable with the status quo. So I think the question for us as civil society is that, how do we get to, let me say, is it unnormalize, find a way to not make these things normal to Ugandans, that Ugandans have gotten to a place of compliance and in a state of everything just comes and yes, I wouldn't call it comfortable, but you just a situation when you're depressed and then you just go through life, whatever comes, everything acts on you, and you're just moving through. You're not you're not in the moment. So I think for us the biggest thing is, how do we get the populace to get out of that state, that state of
hopelessness.
Yeah, of hopelessness, exactly. How do we get them out of that state of hopelessness and say that, hey, okay, this is not fair, this is not what I want for myself, I need to change this. And then we come in to just help them, organize and create, empower them but they need to be the people at the forefront of all these issues. That when we talk about Masaka killings, the people in Masaka, not Stella Nyanzi coming all the way from Kampala, but the people in Masaka storm and say, hey, these things have been going on for years, there's no explanation, that the whole population comes out, we are in fear, you need to give us answers. Yeah. To me, I think that is the way forward.
Thank you so much, Marion. Maybe that's when you talked about the Entebbe killings.
Yeah.
Maybe as women, we need to come back to the Women's March UG.
Yeah.
I would like to commend the women's movement. I remember you were at the forefront that time, me inclusive, when we spearheaded the Women's March UG, which was basically creating awareness in regards to the femicide, killing of women in Entebbe, and holding the state accountable. So maybe there's need to also engage more of community people, but also as a nation. We are on Women's Show today. Let us as women rise up, and we can have other allies, men and all the other sectors come to join us in regards to holding the state accountable. I don't remember them giving us a report that time, but at least there were strides, and also they at least engaged and gave us a few reports that were not so clear, but it was a step that we took. As we finish and also conclude this Women's Show today, I'd like to get some parting shot. Just 1 minute, any parting shot you would like to give our viewers today on Women's Show? We start with Mercy.
Yeah, that these realities we've discussed really, for me, go to one thing, that the issue of governance and civic space is, it doesn't know a woman, doesn't know a man, doesn't know a sector. It's not just for NGOs, it is for all of us, and that the trajectory of our governance is worrisome. Every sector is affected, regardless of which one you belong to. It's very important for us to take the conscious decision to organize and push back and reclaim our country.
Wow.
And for the benefit of the future generation.
Thank you so much, Mercy Munduru. Grace, yes, let's have Marion.
Yes, I think I would go back to Kennedy's quote, and where he says that ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I think at this state, we do know that at the state in which this country is from, there's very little it can do for us as Ugandans. So we need to look into ourselves as women, young people, old generation, whatever, as Ugandans ourselves, and say that how do we bring about that country that we want so much, that country that we complain all the time and want, and how do we sit down and organize and think that, okay, there is not, because there's nothing that the state is going to do to make your life comfortable. Their aim is to stay in power, and no matter how many policies we pass, no matter how many how much community policing that we do, as long as the system wants things in a certain way, it is going to be like that no matter how much we push back. So yes, we need to organize as Ugandans, connect with each other, be united in our cause, and know that, this is the struggle should not be for one Besigye or a one Bobby Wine or one person, but it should not even have a leader at all. That it should be every Ugandan every day waking up and saying, I need to make sure that I live in a better country, that my children live in the better country, that I have access to an education, that my girls are living in a safe environment. So how do I organize around making that a reality? How do I organize in making sure that what is mine is what I pay for in taxes comes back to me? So I think that that's where we should go, and as civil society, we need to make a deliberate attempt to get the population there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marion Kirabo. Maybe to our viewers, thank you so much. First, I would like to thank our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for the informative and very rich debate. And also our viewers, thank you so much for watching our Women's Show today. Remember to like and subscribe to Women's Show, but also Civic Space TV. Subscribe. On Mondays, we have this show, which is called the Community Show. On Tuesday, we have the Women's Show. On Wednesday, we have a show in regards to Youth Roundtable. We have the Inter-University Debate shows. On Thursday, we have Chat Show. On Friday, and then we have different shows like the Women Empowerment Show, which is with Honorable Monica Amoding on Saturday. And lastly, we have the Diaspora Show on Sunday. Remember to subscribe and like and join all these conversations on Civic Space TV. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, panelists.
Thank you, God.
Thank you.